Okay, and Bible prophecy says in Revelation 13 that it's the United States that can force the whole world to worship the beast. Okay? So the United States doesn't suddenly go second, third, fourth place. The United States is the power to the very end. Okay, I learned an expression, it's all over the world, but I learned it when we were in Korea a long time ago. A Korean told me, he says, when the United States sneezes, South Korea gets a cold. Okay? The whole world understands. Whether they want to admit it or not, they're jealous, especially the Europeans. Europeans, they really, sorry, Brother Dave, but they're really frustrated with the United States, okay? And we shouldn't have a problem with that because we're strangers and pilgrims. We're not Republicans and Democrats anyway, okay? But the United States is the most prominent country in the world. Can't get around it. Now, let me ask you a question. Is the Seventh-day Adventist Church the most prominent church in the world? No. I've seen the Dalai Lama on the front pages of magazines. I've seen the Pope of Rome on the front pages of magazines. I see articles about the head of the Church of England. How often do you see the General Conference President on the front of a Time magazine? Okay, it's simply not. Now, don't get me wrong, in the very near future, Seventh-day Adventists will be the most prominent church in the world. But here in verse 41, the glorious land, it's a land, number one, and it's the land in sense of prominence. First argument. It's the most prominent country in the world. And everyone knows that's the United States. Daniel's usage. Looking in Daniel 11:16. Daniel's used the term glorious land prior to verse 41. In verse 16 it says, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, by which by his hand shall be consumed. This is talking about when pagan Rome takes control of the world. And when pagan Rome takes control of the world, it has to overcome 3 geographical areas. And here in verse 16, it's overcoming one of those geographical areas, which is the glorious land, which was Palestine, which was Israel. It was the land of Israel. When Daniel uses the term glorious land here in verse 16, he's talking about the country of Palestine, of Israel, ancient Israel. He's not talking about the church of Israel. He's talking about the land. Okay, Ezekiel 20, verses 6 and 15. In the day that I lift up mine hand unto them to bring them forth out of the land of Egypt into a land that I had espied for them, flowing with milk and honey, which is the what? See, the land where ancient Israel lived was the glory of all the lands. Look at verse 20. Is it verse 20? 15. Yet also I lifted up my hand unto them in the wilderness, that I would not bring them into the land which I had given them, flowing with milk and honey, which is the glory of all the lands. The land where the Lord placed the people of ancient Israel is the glory of all the land. It's the glorious land. And it's a land flowing with milk and honey. What's that mean? What's it mean that it's a land flowing with milk and honey? Well, it means that the Lord had given the people of Israel the responsibility of carrying the gospel to the world. So He placed them in a land that was at the center of the ancient world. And He placed them in a land that had the financial capabilities of carrying the gospel to the world, should they have chosen to do so. It was flowing with milk and honey. What's the history of the United States? It's a land flowing with milk and honey. Met a pastor from Ghana. Have been friends with him ever since. Been friends with him for many years. Any of you here from Ghana? Do you know what the people in Ghana call the United States? It's kind of a slang for the United States. It doesn't matter if they're Christians. It's called the glorious land. The whole world knows it's the glorious land. Why is it the glorious land? Because it's flowing with milk and honey. Isn't it? Okay. That's what ancient Israel was like too. What was the purpose? So that God's people had the financial capabilities of carrying the gospel to the world. Okay. Notice from God's helping hand. Everything that can be done should be done to circulate thoughts on Daniel and Revelation. I know of no other book that can take the place of this one. It is God's helping hand. There's some problems with Uriah Smith's book, Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation, but still, it's the best overview of Daniel and Revelation that was in existence in the time of Sister White. She called it God's helping hand. There's too much of it in there that is just excellent to disregard the book based upon a few human flaws that are in it. Okay, and in that book, when he's dealing with verse 16 that we already read, the glorious land, here's what Uriah Smith says. He says, after putting an end to the war, Pompey demolished the walls of Jerusalem, transferred several cities from the jurisdiction of Judea to that of Syria, and imposed tribute upon the Jews. For the first time, Jerusalem was by conquest placed in the hands of Rome. That power was to hold the glorious land in its iron grasp till it had utterly consumed it. He's not talking about the church there. He's talking about the nation of Israel. Okay, and he's commenting on verse 16, which is the first time Daniel uses the word glorious land. So you would expect that if Daniel is identifying the glorious land in verse 16 as a country, that when he uses glorious land in verse 41, he doesn't expect us to understand it's a church. It's a country in the usage of Uriah Smith. Third argument, the covenant. There are three covenant promises. Are we all aware of these? Evidently not. I didn't hear some amens. One covenant promise is that you and I, right now, can receive the mind of Christ if we will come to the foot of the cross and meet the conditions of the gospel. That's a covenant promise. Right now, we can have the mind of Christ. Can we have a glorified body right now? Nope. When do we get that? At the second coming, if we're faithful, we get the second covenant promise, which is a glorified body. But what's the third covenant promise? And what is the covenant promise that is spoken of more than the other two put together over and over again? That the Lord would give the people a land to dwell in. Notice under land. Never has the Lord been without true representatives on this earth who have made his interest their own. These witnesses for God are numbered among spiritual Israel, and to them will be fulfilled all the covenant promises made by Jehovah to his ancient people. All the covenant promises are promised to us. What are the three covenant promises? That we can have the mind of Christ right here and now, that we can have a glorified body at the second coming if we're faithful and obedient, and that the Lord is going to give us a land. Okay? Now, in a minute we'll get to the heritage of Jacob, which I learned here recently from Pastor Dario. But the third covenant promise is that we would have a land to dwell in. Okay? Notice from Prophets and Kings, page 22. Of special value to God's church on earth today, the keepers of his vineyards are the messages of counsel and admonition given through the prophets who have made plain his eternal purpose in behalf of mankind. In the teachings of the prophets, his love for the lost race and his plan for their salvation are clearly revealed. The story of Israel's call, of their successes and failures, of their restoration to divine favor, of their rejection of the master of the vineyard, and of their carrying out the plan of the ages by a goodly remnant to whom are to be fulfilled all the covenant promises. This has been the theme of God's messengers to his church throughout the centuries that have passed. And today, God's messages to his church, to those who are occupying his vineyard as faithful husbandmen, is none other than that spoken through the prophet of old. Sing ye unto her, a vineyard of red wine. I, the Lord, do keep it. I will water it every moment, lest any hurt it. I will keep it night and day. We're the receivers of all the covenant promises. And ancient Israel was given a land to dwell in. You follow me? That was one of the covenant promises. It was the glorious land. It was a land flowing with milk and honey. Modern Israel, if you download off, I assume, off one of the internet sites, Pastor Dario's presentation on Malachi, Everyone are familiar with that presentation where he goes through and shows that Malachi 1 is the first angel's message, Malachi 2 is the second angel's message, Malachi 3 is the third angel's message, and Malachi 4 is the fourth angel's message. If you go through that, he begins by showing the heritage of Esau, the foolish virgins in Adventism, and their heritage is death and destruction. But when he gets to the conclusion, he talks about the heritage of Jacob. And what's the heritage of Jacob? Well, one component of the heritage of Jacob's is that they get a promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And ancient Israel was the recipients of the heritage of Jacob. They were recipients of the covenant promise. The Lord put them in Palestine of old, a land flowing with milk and honey. You follow me? That's the heritage of Jacob. Modern Israel received the heritage of Jacob. They're the receivers of all the covenant promises. We just read it. So where did the Lord place modern Israel? The United States, the glorious land, the land flowing with milk and honey. At the beginning of Adventism, the heritage of Jacob is the Constitution, the United States of America, and the separation of church and state that allows Adventism to proclaim, develop this message. You follow it? That's the heritage of Jacob. But at the end of the world, the heritage of Jacob is different for us. Pastor Dario didn't mention this that I recall. If the heritage of Jacob for ancient Israel was they were given the land of Palestine to live in, and the heritage of Jacob for modern Israel, the birth of Adventism, was that they were given the spiritual glorious land, the United States, to begin the Seventh-day Adventist Church in. What's the heritage of Jacob for us Laodicean Adventists at the end of the world? That is, to correctly understand the glorious land in Bible prophecy. Because when you correctly understand that, you open up the final warning message. Okay? Maybe you didn't follow that, but let's move to the next argument. Spirit of prophecy. What does the Spirit of prophecy say about the United States? The unrivaled mercies and blessings of God have been showered upon our nation. It has been the land of liberty. The what? The glory of the whole earth. Sister White says the United States is the glory of the whole earth. Sounds kind of like the glorious land to me. She says, is it in vain that the declaration of eternal truth has been given to this nation to be carried to all the nations of the world? God has chosen the people and made them repositories of truth weighty with eternal results. To them has been given the light that must illuminate the world. Has God made a mistake? Are we indeed His chosen instrumentalities? Are we the men and women who are to bear to the world the messages of Revelation 14, to proclaim the message of salvation to those who are standing on brink of ruin? Do we act as if we were? When the land which the Lord provided as an asylum for His people, that they might worship Him according to the dictates of their own consciences, the land over which for long years the shield of omnipotence has been spread, the land which God has favored by making it the depository of the pure religion of Christ, when that land shall, through its legislators, abjure the principles of Protestantism and give countenance to the Romish apostasy and tampering with God's law, it is then that the final work of the man of sin will be revealed. What land is she speaking about? The United States. And what does she say about the United States? It's where He provided an asylum for His people, which He's protected. Brothers and sisters, the glorious land in the world is known as the United States. The glorious land in the Bible and the glorious land in the Spirit of prophecy is the United States. There are some other quotes along that line from the Spirit of prophecy. Fifth argument, Daniel's distinction. Do you understand what we're doing? I'm giving you the arguments. That, not all of them, but I'm giving you a whole bunch of arguments that prove that the glorious land of verse 41 is not the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's the United States of America. Daniel's distinction. Verse 40, if you're in Daniel 11, verse 41, it speaks of the glorious land.